If you were to filter through every center the NBA has ever seen, you would find just 9 who have averaged at least 24 points and 11 rebounds between their 4th and 7th seasons in the league. 8 of these players are in the Hall of Fame, have won at least one MVP, and have won at least one NBA championship. And altogether, these 8 names combine to produce 19 MVPs and 19 championships. And of course, the 9th player on this exclusive list is DeMarcus Cousins. The thing is though, unlike every single other player on that list, DeMarcus has not only not won an MVP or a championship, he also hasn't been named to the first team All-NBA or even made the playoffs. This lack of success has created many questions that have caused some to believe that despite his talent on the court, DeMarcus's baggage off the court will hold him back from fulfilling his tremendous potential. What's up guys, Mike here, and the topic of today's video is pretty simple. Today, we're talking about the dysfunction in the Sacramento Kings front office that caused the DeMarcus Cousins trade. We're gonna look at both sides of the story here, and by the end of the video, we'll find out the real reason the Kings traded DeMarcus Cousins. Yesterday, I talked about what the DeMarcus Cousins trade means for the New Orleans Pelicans. If you missed that video, the link is in the description. But today we are talking about the dysfunction that is the Sacramento Kings. So looking at this travesty of a trade, we already know what the Kings' excuse will be. This wasn't the worst trade in the world because they're getting rid of a head case, a supposed star who has never even finished a season with more wins than losses. But here's the thing, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that Cousins' hot-headed nature has been the Sacramento Kings' problem for the last 7 years. Because at the end of the day, Sacramento's lack of success has little to do with DeMarcus and has everything to do with the Kings' front office. So let's start with the latest and greatest in Sacramento Kings screw-ups and talk about the Cousins trade. The Kings sent DeMarcus Cousins, a top 10 player in the NBA, to New Orleans for Buddy Hield, Tyreke Evans, Langston Galloway, and the Pelicans' 2017 first round pick. By any calculation here, the Kings got absolutely robbed. The best asset they're getting in this trade is Buddy, a man who's already 23 years old and is averaging just 8.6 points per game this season and is shooting less than 40% from the field. But don't worry, Kings fans, because basketball genius Vivek Ranadive, who we'll talk about later on, trust me, thinks that Buddy has the potential to be as good as Steph Curry. Doesn't matter that the consensus among NBA GMs is that Buddy might grow into a high-level bench player or a fringe starter at best. It doesn't matter that Curry averaged 17.5 points and 6 assists a night during his rookie year when he was also 2 years younger than Buddy. Nope, Vivek saw Buddy kill it in college, so he's the next Steph Curry. And I just have to add here that I really hate hating on Buddy right now. I mean, who knows, maybe he will grow into a star. I hope he does. It's just that when your owner says he made this trade because he thinks you can become Steph Curry, a 2-time MVP, well, we just need to address that. What's worse is that the only other decent asset the Kings got back in this move was the Pelicans' first round pick, which will have some pretty subpar value. This is the perfect example of why you don't trade good players for first round picks during the season. With Cousins, the Pelicans are only going to get better. They could even end up grabbing the 8th seed in the West, which would mean the Kings would end up with the 15th pick in this year's draft. And here's the best part here. Even if the Pelicans missed the playoffs and somehow defied all odds and ended up killing it in the draft lottery and grabbing a top 3 pick, the Kings for some reason agreed to give New Orleans a top 3 protection on that pick. They aren't even giving themselves a chance to somehow luck out and end up with Markelle Fultz or Lonzo Ball or Josh Jackson or some other top prospect. What the are they doing? And I don't want to hear that this might have been the best offer they were gonna get, because the Kings could have traded Cousins sometime in the last 2 seasons for a lot more. It's on them that they waited this long, and now his trade value is at an all-time low. Plus, they traded him away days before the deadline ended. If they really wanted to trade him this badly, they could have at least waited and tried to get teams to compete against each other and see if they could end up with a better offer. Which is why 99% of people know this is a horrible move for the Kings. But as you've probably heard, there is that 1% who's saying things like, a cloud has been lifted from the city of Sacramento. So let's just get this out in the open and talk about the problems that Cousins has had. We all know that the man has been described as a locker room cancer. As in his 7 years in Sacramento, we've just about seen it all. He's fought with his coaches, he's fought with refs, he's even fought with reporters, and even his own teammates have let it be known that every day of practice has the potential for a DeMarcus Cousins freakout, and that over the course of a long NBA NBA season, the antics of DeMarcus are just too much for most people to handle. So right now, you may be thinking that Sacramento has a point here, but I don't think that's the case. And to demonstrate why I think this, I have a story for you. Let's take a trip back to the past, back to an early season practice in 2014. On this day, the Kings were playing sloppy basketball, so then head coach Mike Malone told the team to line up to run sprints. DeMarcus was not having it and simply said, "Fuck this man, I'm not running." And so Malone got in Cousins' face and said, "Motherfucker, you're going to run or you're going to get the fuck out of my practice, you big pussy." To which Cuz replied, "I ain't running, Mike." And with that, Malone kicked him out of practice. Now, this story might not paint DeMarcus in the best light, but it's what took place after it that helps us understand the mind of DeMarcus Cousins. Because after being kicked out of practice, DeMarcus showed up the next day ready to get to work. He began to control his temper and the team began to win. Through 15 games in the 2014 season, the Kings found themselves riding high with a 9-6 record. For the first time in a long time, Kings fans actually felt that they could make the playoffs. And Cousins himself pointed to Malone as the reason for this success. Because in the world of DeMarcus, the most important thing is trust. And after Mike Malone showed that he wasn't gonna put up with Cousins' crap, but was gonna make him the best basketball player he could be, DeMarcus really came to trust and respect Malone. For once the Kings were winning. For once he was happy. Then DeMarcus contracted viral meningitis, and the Kings proceeded to lose 8 of their next 10 games. Which leads us to the day when the trust between Cousins and the Kings organization was damaged beyond repair. Despite the fact that the team was losing games because its star player was out sick, Vivek Ranadive felt that the Kings needed a change in coaching yet again. So while DeMarcus was on his way to a charity event, Ranadive called him into the team office to ask him what his thoughts were on the team's coaching. DeMarcus had absolutely no problems, which is why he was confused when the front office told him that they felt the Kings would perform better if Malone was fired and Ty Corbin replaced him as head coach. Cousins asked them if they had lost their minds, and if they were serious, how long would it be before they would make their decision? They replied that the decision had already been made and that Malone had already been fired. To which DeMarcus replied, "What reason could you possibly have to take me away from a charity event to tell me that the only head coach I have ever liked and respected on the Kings has already been fired?" And so after that happened, if you were DeMarcus Cousins, would you ever trust the Kings front office again? Would you trust the team that fired the only professional coach that you respected and the only professional coach that led you to success? Would you trust a team that's fired 5 head coaches in the 7 years you've been in the league? You probably wouldn't, especially when you consider just how terrible the Kings front office is in general. To show you what we're working with here, when he bought the team, Kings owner Vivek Ranadive seriously pitched the idea to the team's front office to play 4-on-5 on defense and leave one man back on the other end of the court to cherry pick. Yeah, that was a real idea that Ranadive had. And for most franchises, if your owner didn't know anything about basketball, it wouldn't be that big of a problem. Unfortunately for Sacramento, Ranadive makes real basketball decisions all the time. He's been behind the firing of several coaches. He even made the executive decision to draft Nick Stauskas with the 8th pick in the draft. His influence on the team is serious and has a huge negative impact. And when you combine that with the incompetence of Sacramento's front office, well, you end up with this. Let's just go year by year here. In 2010, the Kings traded Kevin Martin for Carl Landry and a washed-up Larry Hughes. Kevin Martin would eventually be a key piece in the James Harden trade just 2.5 years later. That summer, Sacramento drafted Cousins and Hassan Whiteside. Just 2 years later, they waived Whiteside, who has now emerged as a force in Miami. In 2011, they drafted Bismack Biyombo and traded him for Jimmer Fredette, who they then cut less than 3 years later. Moving ahead, in the 2012 draft, the Kings select Thomas Robinson 1 pick ahead of Damian Lillard. They then traded Robinson that same season because he's just that awful. In the next year's draft, they took Ben McLemore 3 picks ahead of CJ McCollum. The year after, they selected Nick Stauskas 5 picks ahead of Zach LaVine. In 2015, they took Willie Cauley-Stein, a man who could only play center and they already had a center in Cousins, ahead of Devin Booker, Justice Winslow, and Emmanuel Mudiay. And even if they really needed another big man, they could have taken Miles Turner. Finally, in the 2016 draft, they took Marquise Chris, but traded him away to draft even more centers, causing DeMarcus to tweet, "Lord, give me strength. And the craziest thing about all of this is that we haven't even looked at the Kings' 2 worst trades yet, other than this DeMarcus Cousins trade, of course. Anyway, remember Nick Stauskas? Well, in the summer of 2014, just 1 year after drafting him, the Kings included Stauskas in a salary dump trade to the 76ers in an attempt to clear up cap space in order to sign Wesley Matthews. With their new cap space, the Kings failed to sign Matthews and instead signed a washed-up Rajon Rondo, which wouldn't be horrible if the Kings hadn't sent their unprotected 2019 first-round pick to the 76ers in this trade, which means that the Kings are now in rebuilding mode and they don't own their first-round pick in just 2 years. As for the second trade here, well, remember Isaiah Thomas? Remember that after averaging 20 points and 6 assists a game as a 24-year-old, the Kings decided that they didn't want to pay Isaiah Thomas and instead traded him to the Suns for a no-name player and a trade exception. That's it. That's all they got. They gave up a man who's capable of averaging 30 points a game to instead sign Darren Collison in free agency. So just wrapping all of these bad moves up, we see that even if the Kings made the correct choice on just a few of these countless decisions, they could have began the 2017 season with a roster of Isaiah Thomas, Devin Booker, and DeMarcus Cousins. Or maybe they could have had Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, and DeMarcus Cousins. But instead, the Kings failed to ever put a decent team around DeMarcus. So before you point the finger at him for being a hothead, just remember that Sacramento has wasted 7 years of his playing career. And so guys, before I reveal the real reason the Kings traded DeMarcus Cousins, I just want to remind you that we are in the best time of the year right now, the NBA trade deadline. This is basically our Christmas. So make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be grinding out videos like this for every big move that happens. Plus at the end, I'm going to wrap up the trade deadline with a winners and losers video. And speaking of losers, well, when we look at other trades that have been coined the worst in NBA history, we can at least usually determine what that team was thinking. That's even the case for the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah, they gave away their whole future to Boston, but they were in a new city, they wanted to generate interest for their team, so they went into win now mode. It was still a horrible trade, but at least we know their rationalization behind it. As for the Kings, well, they basically traded away Cousins just to keep this year's pick, which if they fall out of the top 10 this year, they owe to the Bulls. And by the way, they owe that conditional pick to the Bulls because of a trade that got them JJ Hickson. Yeah, so at this point, you may have determined the real reason for this trade by yourself, because to me, it's pretty obvious. The real reason the Kings traded DeMarcus Cousins is because their entire front office is run by idiots. Seriously, it's just that simple. They are incompetent. If you happen to be a Kings fan, I am just so sorry for you. In fact, I wore this jersey in today's video to honor the memory of Sacramento Boogie. R.I.P. Cuz. R.I.P. Because even if this trade somehow miraculously works out, even if the Kings manage to somehow get a top 3 pick, well, I'm sure they'll find a way to draft a bust, because again, they are incompetent. At least the one bright spot of this trade is that the Kings freed both Cousins and AD at the same time, which is pretty awesome. And I actually played out that scenario on my second channel. The video is titled, Can DeMarcus Cousins Win the Pelicans the 2018 Championship? The link is down below, and I think you're gonna want to subscribe to that channel, because lately, I've been playing out a bunch of cool NBA scenarios there, such as what if Kevin Durant left his team every time he lost? Yeah, I went there. So go sub to my second channel. We're having a ton of fun there. To everyone who's already subscribed, thank you guys so much for supporting me. You're awesome, you know that. And as always, have an awesome day, and R.I.P. Boogie Cuz.